Hello and welcome to Under the Dome. I'm Travis Washington. It's about 20 degrees here in Montpelier, Vermont. We're here to ask legislators about what their goals are for this next coming session, and we're also going to get some of their reactions to the budget. Hello, and I am here with Tanya Wiehoffsky from Essex, one of our senators, right? Awesome. Could you tell me just briefly what committees you'll be on in this session?
Absolutely. So I am returning this session to the same committees I was on last session, which is the Judiciary Committee, and then I'm Vice Chair of the Government Operations Committee as my two standing committees. Some of the more ad hoc committees like Ethics or Pension Oversight are yet to be named.
And for us in Burlington, public safety has been a big issue. What are some strategies that you're going to be bringing to this session to help ease some of the pain that people have been going through?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when we're talking about public safety, we need to really zoom out and think about keeping every member of our community safe and not simply police response, and really investing in solutions that meet people's needs. So I think, some of the things that I will be proposing around public safety won't even happen in the Judiciary Committee. They're going to happen in the Housing Committee, because when we make sure that people's basic needs are met, we're much more likely to have safe communities. And also looking at innovative ways of meeting people's healthcare needs and mental health needs and utilizing restorative justice and really making sure that we're investing in new solutions that are proven to work rather than going back to old solutions that have actually shown not to be terribly effective. I think the other really important thing we need to do is address the court backlog. One of the most critical aspects of holding people accountable is swift accountability, which is not something that we're currently doing a very good job at.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yes.
And yes, that is all needed. But so you were saying part of it is not necessarily in the Judiciary Committee. How do you plan to communicate that message to your constituents and to a lot of other people who are really who have this as a big issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do regular Front Porch Forum posts. I do monthly newsletters to constituents, and Senator Gulick and I usually do monthly constituent meetups. Our first one is actually on Saturday from 2 to 3:30 at Standing Stone Wine in Winooski. I really think that it's important that we're having a back and forth and that we're also grounding the work that we're doing in the facts and statistics. And there are real issues that we need to solve and real things that we need to respond to. And we also need to recognize Vermont is still the safest state in the country. Burlington is the fourth safest city in the country. And again, that doesn't mean there aren't issues, but we need to really be thoughtful in right-sizing our responses to what's going on.
Wow, amazing. Thank you. And besides housing, besides public safety, what is another area that you really want to make sure that people remember that this is what Tanya got done this session?
Yeah, I mean, I'm one person of 30 and one person of 180 respectively, so certainly there are things I'll be championing and fighting for, but I can't do it alone. But one of the things I think is really top on people's minds and is really critically important to me is public education and sustainable funding of our public education system. In so many areas we ask people who simply can't pay more to keep paying more, and public education's no different. Our public education system is critically important for democracy, in public safety. The better people are educated, the less likely they are to engage in and be involved with the criminal justice system. So it's really important that we have an equitable, fair public education system, but also that those who are able to pay are paying their fair share, and that we don't consistently ask our low and moderate income Vermonters to pay more. Currently, that group of people shoulders most of the burden for funding public education. And so I will be proposing and moving forward with eliminating the education income tax on primary residences and moving towards a fully income-based tax so that we ease the burden on the people who need relief from property taxes most.
I am here with Representative Troy
Hedrick.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. And could you tell me what committees you are on?
I serve on the Corrections and Institutions Committee, so that is the committee that does. So we're waiting. After this, we'll get the capital bill and the governor's proposed budget on that, and then we'll start looking at that as a committee. And then we also do corrections policy.
Awesome. And I know in Chittenden County there's a big deal with the potential prison in Essex. What would you say to ease people's either concerns or about that?
I think so. I am absolutely in favor of building a new facility. The current facility, correctional facility for women in South Burlington, by any objective standard is horrendous. And if we don't commit to building a new facility, I worry that the women and the workers, right? Anytime we're talking about a correctional facility, we're not just talking about the people who are housed there, we're talking about the people who work there as well, are going to either languish in that building, or I worry that we're going to start looking at other options, which the out-of-state option always concerns me. So I am anticipating that the capital budget will have a pretty good chunk of money in it set aside for a new facility.
And what kind of message do you think building a new facility over maybe building more third spaces or schools sends to the community?
Your question is a valid one, and it most certainly is a question that is hard to wrestle with for me, because I do believe that we can build a society that is less reliant on incarceration as a response to, when people violate social norms. That being said, I know the political landscape in this building, and last year, for example, just me introducing into my committee that we should divest from our use of private prisons, right? 120 Vermonters, male Vermonters, are currently housed in Mississippi at a for-profit prison. I couldn't get more than 2 committee members to agree with me, much less 150 to agree with me. So I know what the political landscape is, and I have to make these decisions. What is the best decision I can make right now? Knowing what has traction and what doesn't. So I'm not jazzed about approving a new facility to be built. I have come to realize that it's probably our best option right now for getting women and workers out of the facility that they're currently in.
Well, thank you for such a candid answer. But another question I have is, how do you plan to communicate a divestment from incarceration and that kind of stuff to your constituency and also to your fellow committee members?
Yeah, I have never seen myself as an incrementalist, and I realize that's what I have to be here. So for me, that's going to be looking at what can we change. And one of the things that I'm trying to convince folks of, and I'm getting a pretty good reaction in committee, is that we have to look at how we treat people who are currently incarcerated, and that includes the exploitation of their labor. That includes the out-of-control profits on commissary and how much it costs for them to buy things that you and I just take for granted, like a bag of chips. It includes the fact that it's 2025 and we're still charging incarcerated Vermonters for an envelope, and we don't give them an iPad to communicate with their circles of support. So that's where I'm going to be putting my energy, is trying to chip away at some of those things, and hopefully move us to a kind of a common vision to start the conversation about what does it mean to be a restorative community, because incarceration is not restorative. I know that the mantra is there's no such thing as a trauma-informed prison, and I agree with that. We've done a terrible job of responding to the trauma that our incarcerative facilities create. I do believe we can do better. I do think the handwriting is on the wall that a new facility is going to be built, so the controls that I have left are, what does that place look like? How is it designed? And I know it's not going to be an answer to the really tough questions about what do prisons do to people, but I'm going to do what I can.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you would want your constituents to know about what your work here is this session or what you do here? Yeah,
my work is just going to be as collaborative as I can and find the people who can help me pass as progressive a legislation as we can. And I 2 years under my belt, I feel like I've got some of those relationships. I'm going to continue to nurture them and pull people along as gently as I can.
All right, I'm here with
Lori Houghton. I represent Essex Junction.
Oh, amazing. And what kind of committees are you on?
So this is my 5th term. I've always been on House Healthcare. Last session I was chair of House Healthcare, and then this session I'm now House Majority Leader.
All right, so do you focus more on housing or healthcare, or really how they link together?
So healthcare is really healthcare, but healthcare affects everything that you do, so there's linkages, but we're all kind of working our silos until a bill crosses the path. So I sit on that committee, but then as majority leader, I'm responsible for kind of the caucus and the strategy and policies we want to pass, what our priorities are to help Vermonters.
And housing is a big issue in Chittenden County. What are some strategies you're hoping to bring this session to get things done?
Yeah, so we passed Act 181 last year, which really has helped start more affordable housing. Developers are coming together to do more projects, and so we need to look at that legislation as we look at a lot of previous legislation and just see what we need to do more of, better of, to increase the housing stock. I mean, I live in Essex Junction, and we're building apartments. A lot of apartments, and so we just need to be very thoughtful about building in downtowns and make sure we have the money to do that.
And then, yeah, because housing and environment is really tied. Like the last couple years, we've had a lot of flooding, which means a lot of displaced Vermonters. How do you think housing stocks and housing rates are going to keep up with that extra load on our our housing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a struggle, no doubt. We're focused on climate resiliency and how communities and towns recover from flooding, and so that is a priority of ours. Committees are still doing the work, so I'm not sure how it's going to look, but it's an issue. Yeah.
And is there anything that you would want your constituents to know that, like, this is what I accomplished at the end of this session?
Yeah, like that's always what we want to do, right? We want to be able to hear from Vermonters why we're here, pass legislation and policies, or review previous legislation and policies to make sure that they work for Vermonters. So my goal when I leave here, we do community conversations or at the end of the session, is to talk to Vermonters and say, okay, did this help you? And if it didn't, why not? And how can we do better?
And yeah, we talk about communication. What are your plans to communicate your accomplishments this session?
Yeah, so like I said, I kind of work for the whole caucus, and so we're doing weekly press conferences, we're putting out press releases, we're trying to elevate the things that we're doing down here so Vermonters can be included in the conversation, know what we're trying to do, and then again provide us feedback. So we do that through coffee hours, community conversations, people meet in libraries. Every district is different, but we're definitely committed to getting out in front of the public.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And it was lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
All right, I'm here with
Todd Nielsen.
Todd Nielsen, and this is your first time in the legislature, your first session in the legislature. What committees are you on?
I'm on Human Services.
Awesome. And what do you hope to achieve this session in Human Services? In the Human Services Committee.
There's a lot going on. It's a lot to think about. I'm really happy being here, and I'm enjoying my new experience.
Amazing. And so what stood out to you as really interesting or novel about the committee that you're a part of, or even just being in the legislature?
I didn't really pick Human Services. I was kind of placed there because the people thought that's where I should be. And like I said, it's a lot going on, and I have a lot to learn. I have a lot to learn. Oh my gosh, I had no idea that Human Services was $1.9 billion. 47% of the budget is Human Services. So I can't even begin to tell you where it ends and where it starts.
So what is classified as Human Services?
Everything. It's the list is endless.
And for the state-wise, so it's like mostly like...
Right now we're dealing with the women's shelters, the safe injection site, the stipends, the emergency shelters, and that's just in the hospital budgets, and it goes on and on. I can't even begin to tell you.
And so it's like staffing that and analyzing how much funding is going into that and that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. I had no idea. That's why I'm learning.
I had no idea either.
Amazing.
But I'm trying my best, and I'm taking it all in, and that's all I can say.
And how do you plan to communicate what you're working on this session to your constituents?
Usually, every other week, I go into the Reporter. It's a brand new newspaper, and they have a legislator column, and I'll pretty much tell them what I'm doing that week.
Amazing. Well, you can always find a local public access station, too, and share that information. Thank you so much, and it was lovely to meet you.
Great.
I'm here with Senator Martine LaRocque-Gulick. And first question I want to ask you is, what committees are you on this session?
Great question. I am Vice Chair of Health and Welfare in the morning, and in the afternoon, I'm in the Finance Committee.
Wow, that's a lot going on right now, especially because affordability is such a big deal. What are your plans to tackle some of affo- the what Vermonters perceive as an affordability problem this session?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So obviously, between health and welfare and finance, there's a lot of crossover. We're talking about education finance in the finance committee, but in terms of healthcare and healthcare costs, there's a lot of crossover between the two committees. Right now, in health and welfare, I am really interested in reforming our certificate of need laws. A certificate of need is something that an individual or a group needs to receive from the Green Mountain Care Board. It's basically asking them permission to be able to build a structure or create something new within a structure that already exists. And what happens is it can sort of stifle growth in healthcare, and it can also lead to not enough access across the state. So that's what I'm working on right now. I'm basically raising the threshold. So right now, if you have a project that is $1 million, you need to ask for a certificate of need. I'm trying to raise that to 10 million just to improve access to folks across the state. Also, a birthing center bill that will give women more autonomy over how and where they give birth. So so I'm doing that. Let's see what else. And then education finance. Huge. Yeah.
Yes, because building more schools, especially in Burlington, we just saw school buildings, and then also a lot of people with their tax rate increases from last year, and we'll see how this town meeting day turns out. But how do you really plan to address those concerns that a lot of people have about their increasing property tax and potential income tax?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. Obviously, I feel for my constituents who are having a hard time affording their property tax bills. This is a huge issue. Vermont is an expensive place to live, and it seems to me, to a certain extent, that's been by design. We haven't put in a lot of structures to protect folks who are either in the middle or are living paycheck to paycheck. As we have seen and as we've heard from our joint fiscal folks, the American economy and the Vermont economy is doing really well if you're in the stock market, if you own property. If not, you're living paycheck to paycheck and you're probably struggling. So in terms of education finance, what I've been working on really is from the construction angle. And we have a lot of schools that are not full. We have a lot of schools that need to be, operating at capacity, and that's not the case. So we need to right size our school system for the declining enrollment that we're seeing across the state. Right now, it's just we're not at the right scale. So to me, that is a huge factor in affordability. I don't want us to overreact too quickly. I think we need to be really thoughtful in what we do, because ultimately I do not want our most vulnerable kids to suffer. So we have to keep that in mind while we're addressing affordability.
And for a lot of smaller communities, the elementary school or the middle school or high school might be their community center. How do we plan to keep that kind of community feeling, as well as right-sizing our schools to make sure that we're staffing them properly, paying the right amount of taxes for them, and that kind of thing?
That's a really good question. First, though, I just want to remind folks that sometimes when you've got a really tiny school, kids are actually not getting the opportunity that they should be getting. They may not be getting like an AP course or a sport or an extracurricular that they might get at a larger school. That's really important. The other thing is one item that we talked about in our school construction task force is really thinking about how can the state encourage, if a community does lose a school, what can you do with that building? Can it become a community center? Can it become a retirement home? Can it become housing? How do you rethink some of these buildings so that they remain kind of the heart and soul of the community, but might help shift education costs in the long run?
Wow, that's amazing. How do you plan to communicate a lot of the work that you're doing this session to your constituents?
That's a really good question. I like to have a lot of coffees, constituent coffees and constituent get-togethers. I had one this past weekend with my House colleagues, and it was at in the New North End at the Bagel Cafe, and we had upwards of 30 people coming in and out. It was really exciting. We had great conversations. I'm doing another one this weekend with Senator Vyhovsky. I need to be sending out my newsletters. I need to be better about that. Obviously, I use social media, but really I love to have like the one-on-one contact with my constituents.
Yeah, I mean, that's so important too. And is there anything else you would want to tell, I don't know, the audience, or want people to know about some of your work here?
What I would like to say to the audience right now is we have been given sort of broad brushstrokes about what this new education system is going to look like. We haven't seen a lot of detail. I want people to pay attention. What are the numbers and how did the governor get to those numbers? I want to see modeling. I want to see data. I want to make sure that we are making really good decisions for our children and for our communities, obviously also for our taxpayers. But moving too quickly could end up being a fiasco, and I don't want us to do that.
I'm here with Senator Keisha Rom Hinsdale, and basically I'm here to ask you what kind of committees you're on this session.
Well, it's always great to have our local news media, and it feeds our deeper experience with democracy. So a privilege to be in touch and to share what we're working on. People may know I'm the Senate Majority Leader now, so that's a responsibility on top of committee roles, where I am leading the 17-member Democratic Caucus. Thank you. And a lot of that is in a very collaborative spirit with our Republican colleagues and the governor. This year, I like to say that if we're both doing our jobs, then the majority steers the ship and the minority points out the rocks. So, we're all in the same boat as Vermonters, and we should continue to operate that way. I continue to serve on Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. I was the chair of that committee before becoming majority leader, and so many of our crises continue to point to housing and a lack of housing as sort of at the root of a lot of those concerns and the ways that we can't move forward and grow our communities without additional affordable housing for people. I actually moved from the Senate Finance Committee to the Senate Education Committee, specifically because I worry that education policy and education finance policy can get off track with each other if we don't speak the same language about both supporting a world-class education for our students and doing it at a rate that taxpayers in Vermont can afford.
Okay, so talking about economics, we're here today right before the governor's budget address. Can you explain a little bit for our viewers about what the budget address is and what you're hoping to gain from this?
Yeah, so, Civics 101, the governor proposes and the legislature disposes. So it's always the prerogative of our, duly elected governor to propose his budget, and most of it is often wrapped up in personnel costs and ongoing programmatic costs for things like education and healthcare and transportation. But then the legislature takes that input, that proposal, and we ultimately decide what to do with the state's purse strings. You saw a lot of Vermonters ask us to listen, to show restraint, to recognize that many people are maxed out. But also, we are looking at a federal government that is going to make us question what the basic role of government is in supporting the most vulnerable and supporting the stability of our middle class. We just today are seeing major federal funding freezes coming out of Washington that impact everything from Head Start and SNAP benefits food support, to Medicaid and to grants that many of our critical programs were hoping to receive. We hope that's extremely temporary, but even that kind of freeze causes chaos and confusion, and it's expensive to set programs back that way, even if it is temporary, which is what we hope. So we really have a lot of work to do to inspire confidence and bring some calm to that process when we have a federal government that is throwing a lot of chaos into the mix.
Right. Wow. Okay, thank you
No
for
big
such.
deal,
I
you
mean,
know?
it is a big deal because there is a lot going on, and it's
Yeah.
hard for a smaller state to support itself, and then bringing back these programs too is expensive. Speaking of like closing things down, that kind of stuff, education, building schools, that kind of stuff, the voucher program. What are your thoughts, and what would you want to communicate to your constituents about education and where we're headed with that?
Well, that Vermonters asked us to strike a really difficult balance. I don't want to call it an impossible one, but Vermonters care so much about education that they constantly want to be able to have a say and to participate in what that education system looks like. And at the same time, that can add cost to a system and confusion about, who ultimately pays and what do they pay if they're voting on their local school budget, but we have a statewide education finance system. So, we are looking at things that the rest of the country does in terms of equitable funding formulas and making sure that kids aren't left behind, but we gain more efficiencies in the system so we're not duplicating costs and efforts. I think we are talking to a lot of people in Chittenden County. One thing that we should be thoughtful about is that in some of our rural parts of the state, those districts are at a bit of a crisis breaking point. They can't find the personnel, they can't find the teachers to meet the same standards and critical needs that we're able to meet in larger districts. So, Chittenden County still needs to participate and understand a lot of that, and we have efficiencies we can gain, but making sure that we don't lose sight of our rural friends and neighbors and how important it is for them that we figure out a governance system that's fair and equitable.
One thing that I've been noticing a lot about these rural communities is that their local school might be their third space and their community gathering space. Like, how do we plan to maintain those spaces but also lower the resources and costs of running a school?
You're exactly right. We plan to create third spaces, and we don't tell a community we're going to take something away from you. We tell them what is the next best vision you have for this important infrastructure, this critical space that you already have that we shouldn't, just sort of let turn into blight or decay. That's a really important conversation for both the Economic Development Committee and the Institutions Committee to figure out with our folks on the ground, do you need more housing? Do you need a child care center? What other kind of third space would be helpful? A Grange type of environment, senior space. So once you help a community dream and vision, you're in a lot better place than saying we're taking something away from you.
Right. Wow. Thank you so much. And it was very nice to see you today. Is there anything else you would want people to really know about what you hope to get done in this session, or what your work here in the State House?
Just that we're all in this together. I'm being a little partisan because I'm the majority leader, but I think the federal government is going to try and sow some chaos and confusion. And some of the policies that are coming down that are very aggressive on immigration and taking economic benefits away, they're simply cruel. And we're going to have to combat that with kindness and stability and just deep support for one another. We saw that 8 years ago, and I think we need to see again that Vermonters look out for one another regardless of what's thrown at us.
The joint assembly may be at ease as we await return of the committee.
Good afternoon, everyone. We just heard the governor's budget address, and my initial takeaway is that there are many areas that we can work together on to make Vermont more affordable for Vermonters. And I was glad to hear that we're still talking about how we can make sure our kids get the best education at a price we can afford. I think we have some common ground that we can find on housing. I am disappointed, though, that we didn't hear more on healthcare. We know that healthcare, one of the main drivers for affordability in the state, that comes up with our education challenges that comes up with a workforce. And so I think that that's a critical piece that we need to hear more from the governor on. And with that, I'm happy to open it up for questions. Is Molly, were you going to come?
Do you have any thoughts about how the governor might be able to address the healthcare crisis? It's a complicated issue with national implications and sometimes beyond the government's control to really affect.
There's no question that healthcare is complicated. I think that the governor came forward with a bold transformational proposal on education, and I would love to see that on healthcare as well, especially with some of the new announcements coming out of Washington, with grants being put on hold. We don't know what that impact looks like on Vermont. I know our federal delegation is monitoring closely, but we need bold action on healthcare too. And that is one where I would love to sit at the table with the governor to figure this out. But there was just not a lot of details, and there wasn't lots of any mentions really of healthcare, and that is just a critical piece. For us this session, it's about education, it's about healthcare, and it's about housing. And those are our key priorities.
Speaking of education, what do you make of the $77 million for the property tax buy down, but then also, he told us in his briefing, the reversing universal school meals and putting that back to needs-based? Is there any appetite for you guys in the House at all for that kind of policy?
The details really matter on all of this work related to education, and the timeline really matters. We want to make sure that we're doing absolutely everything we can to have a strong school for our kids and for our communities. If the buy down is part of a comprehensive system, that is something we are going to continue working into. We're hearing more testimony later this week about how that fits into the larger puzzle.
So it doesn't sound like it's an immediate no to universal school meals if that's a part of the package.
On the buy down, I'm really concerned that I want to make sure that any promises we make, we can keep. And we haven't seen the full budgets from districts yet, so we actually don't know the full cost to our education fund of this year's school budgets.
But to the universal meal issue specifically, you know how many constituencies are invested in that. Are you open to repealing universal school meals?
Universal meals is an incredible opportunity for all of our kids. They are safe, they feel nourished in the schools, and they learn better when they're eating. The cost of school meals has gone down year over year since we first passed it, and frankly, many of our schools don't even own cash registers anymore.
I think it's important that as we're taking up these policies that we're looking at the data and making sure that we know that the programs that we have are working and they're having the intent that we wanted. And so if there's an issue with a program, we have to tackle that. So like we said, everything's on the table, but the data matters. And we have seen that with school meals.
The governor also didn't say much about the loss of federal funding. I'm wondering if you have any sort of sense of what that dollar figure is going to look like this year?
We are in contact with our federal delegation. I have not heard. I know it just happened, and everyone's asking questions and trying to get more information. And the governor didn't mention it in his address. So we hope that he's part of this process and communicating because it's a big deal for Vermonters.
And what role does the legislature play in addressing whatever funding cuts might materialize as a result of federal actions?
We've asked the administration and the Joint Fiscal Office to begin a process of stress testing our reserve funds and our budgets to see what we're ready for.
Yeah, there's just so much uncertainty right now. We don't know what's coming. We don't know how much. We don't know when. Things get started and they get taken back by Washington. So it's hard to plan for that kind of unpredictability and uncertainty.
But would that plan include the possibility of backfilling lost federal funds for organizations that won't have?
Yeah, we don't know what the scope and size of that is, and we have only so much revenue in the state. It's just way too early to speculate on what we could do. But we're paying attention, and we'll continue to see what we can do as we go along.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so as you know, I mean, the political balance of power is a little different this year. Republicans have more seats than maybe in the past decade or two. Just more broadly, I mean, how do you see, do you see more increased collaboration, compromise? I mean, the governor is laying out some pretty big ideas when it comes to like education. I mean, is that something that you guys will realistically be able to get behind? I am optimistic that we will all stay at the table working together to find solutions. I will say in my conversations with
with the minority leader. It's been very positive, and we're talking about how we can work together to get these tough things done. And so we're in it, and I'm going to do everything we can to make sure we can have a solid compromise that everyone will hate together, but that we do it together, and I'm feeling good about that right now.
I wanted to get back to just Kevin's question real quick about like healthcare. You know, hospital budget season is coming up. I mean, it's commercial insurance premiums are continuing to skyrocket. You know, property taxes are a big deal, but what can be done in the short term to provide relief for Vermonters in the healthcare cost arena?
Sure. Our healthcare committee will be doing a deep dive to see what sort of actions we can take to help lower costs and make sure that all the stakeholders around this healthcare conversation are coming to the table and just talking with each other. I think that there's a need for more communication and more collaboration on how we can solve this. And some of the solutions don't need legislation. Some of it is about people coming to the table. And so we'll continue to do that work to see what we can do around healthcare costs. And we really need the governor with us in that conversation.
The governor wants to get rid of the private right of action, the Global Warming Solutions Act, and also start using the efficiency surcharge, the electric efficiency surcharge, to fund carbon pollution reduction projects. Your thoughts on both of those cases?
So I'll say that we worked really hard to find compromise around our climate legislation for the past several years. And now we need to let things play out and come together and focus on these huge issues that we have around public education and how we pay for it. So I'm going to let our committees dive into those proposals and hear from all stakeholders around that conversation and come back with some suggestions and opportunities, just like all the other proposals in his budget. But I want to be clear that we're really going to be focusing on those top 3 priorities around housing, healthcare, and public education.
Is $4 million enough to implement these huge public education changes for the AOE?
I think the devil's in the details on that one, and we need to see, as the policy develops, what those supports will be needed, what supports will be needed. And so that's a number that we'll start with, and we'll see where it goes.
The big priorities are all kind of encapsulated this year, I think we can all agree on, but one of them for the governor, which he mentioned again in his budget address this year, is military pensions and the way those are taxed. Do you foresee that going any differently this session than in years prior?
Look, all of these are on the table, like I said. I'm going to give them credit. 2 policies that we do really care about, the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit, are really great policies. And so it's great that we're finding common ground there. But again, we'll be looking at all of his proposals, and we'll be vetting them and bringing people in to talk about it. One other thing that I haven't said yet that I think is important, I mentioned that there wasn't enough around healthcare. I also think that we need more leadership on flood recovery. I know that is towns are still deeply impacted by that and are really struggling, and so I think we need to do more there.
On that, I think you mentioned that there was $63 million additional dollars from FEMA that I think he's basically saying can go a long way toward flood recoveries, or what beyond that?
Well, I don't know if we're going to get the 68. I think that is a critical number to watch, because if we're putting all our eggs in a basket around federal funding right now, it's a precarious place to be. And so I think we need to not take that for granted.
Don't assume we have it.
Yeah. Back to the Global Warming Solutions Act, the governor characterized the milestones of the Global Warming Solutions Act as arbitrary. I remember a lot of testimony about those milestones being scientifically based and consensus of UN and scientists around the world. Those were based in reality, not arbitrary. How do you feel about that characterization?
Look, our committee worked so hard and got all the facts and got all the testimony to come up with that. And again, that was compromise legislation that we passed. And so, look, again, that's disappointing. We're going to keep our eyes focused on our goals for this session and, again, work together across party lines to get things done.
Is the no new taxes or fees framework at all problematic from your all's view in terms of your ability to construct a budget that meets the needs of Vermonters?
I think sometimes tax credits, such as the earned income tax credit or the child tax credit, which were landmark legislation that we led on just a couple years ago, those are fantastic ways in investing in families' lives and opportunities, and I think that's a great path to go sometimes. Tax expenditures are sometimes thought of as spending and sometimes they're not, and that's another place that the details matter, and we're going to be diving in.
Last question. Madam Chairs, you both have Republican vice chairs. How's the bipartisan thing working out so far?
I think it's working great in House Appropriations. I want to say that my very first term in office started in 2017. We had 83 Democrats, and so it's similar makeup to the body that we have now. And we have been collaborating. We're working together. We all recognize that we do have to work together, and compromises will need to be made. And sometimes we get better decisions as a result of that. So it's going well.
Had the same wonderful Republican vice chair last biennium as this biennium. Representative Canfield and I have a fantastic working relationship and have also really always collaborated very effectively with the cabinet.
Last question, Pat Riley, WAMC. The House heard the education plan earlier. Do you expect similar presentations on the other three key issues?
I have not heard from the governor's office with the request to do a caucus of the whole to talk about those proposals. I know that they are introducing legislation, and we'll look forward to looking at those along with other proposals.
Great, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.